When you think of the gunfight at the OK Corral, you probably picture heroic lawmen in white hats, standing tall against black-hatted villains on a dusty, lawless street. It's the ultimate showdown between good and evil, a story we've seen in countless movies. But truly, if you get your information from Hollywood movies, almost everything you think you know about that famous gunfight is a fabrication at best and an outright lie at worst. The simple, clean story Hollywood sold us is perhaps the biggest myth of the American West. The real story is infinitely more complex, more political, and far more interesting. It's a story not of good versus evil, but of money, power, and a clash of cultures that set a modern city on the path to bloodshed. If you enjoy uncovering the real history of the Old West, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. You won't want to miss the truths we're about to uncover as we expose the lie Hollywood told you. Part 1. The Town Too Rich to Die. The first lie Hollywood tells is about the town itself. The Tombstone of 1881 wasn't some primitive, ramshackle backwater. It was a modern, sophisticated, and politically charged city. It was the epicenter of a massive silver boom that pulled between $40 and $85 million in bullion from the ground, making it the largest silver district in all of Arizona. This incredible wealth was discovered in 1877 by a prospector named Ed Schieffelin. He was warned that the only thing he'd find in the Apache-controlled wilderness was his own tombstone. Well, he found his tombstone, and it turned a barren patch of land into a thriving metropolis almost overnight. Within just a few years, the population exploded from 100 residents to somewhere between 7,000 and 14,000 people. This was a city of ambition and modern amenities. It had 4 churches, 2 banks, 3 newspapers, a school, and even an ice house. For fun, you could visit a bowling alley, 5 ice cream parlors, and over 100 saloons. Fresh seafood was brought in daily from Mexico. By 1882, the city even had telephones. The respectable folks attended operas at the Grand Schieffelin Hall, while miners and cowboys frequented the infamous Birdcage Theater, a saloon, gambling hall, and brothel that never once closed its doors. This wasn't a dusty patch of dirt. The fight that made Tombstone famous was a violent struggle for the economic and political soul of a burgeoning industrial hub. The factions that were about to clash were fighting for control over its money, its mining interests, and its system of law and order. Part 2. The Feud, more than lawmen and outlaws. The conflict that boiled over into the gunfight wasn't a simple showdown between heroes and villains. It was a bitter feud between 2 very different groups, reflecting the raw divisions of the American Civil War, which had ended only 16 years earlier. On one side, you had the Earp faction. This group was led by the Earp brothers, Virgil, Wyatt, and Morgan, and their friend, the gambler and dentist, Doc Holliday. They were not the selfless crusaders of legend. They were ambitious men, experienced lawmen, and entrepreneurs with strong ties to Northern business interests and the Republican Party. They came to Tombstone in 1879 to make their fortunes in mining, real estate, and gambling. The town's business elite, the Law and Order League, saw the Earps as their enforcers, hired to protect their investments. Virgil Earp held the official power as Tombstone's city marshal, which gave their side the color of law. On the other side were the Cowboys. Now, in 1881 Tombstone, cowboy was not a compliment. It was an insult, a word that meant outlaw. This wasn't an organized gang, but a loose network of ranchers and rustlers. Many were ex-Confederate sympathizers from states like Texas and Missouri, and they were politically aligned with the Democratic Party. Key figures included the Clanton brothers, Ike and Billy, and the McClory brothers, Frank and Tom. Their entire business model was based on rustling cattle and horses in Mexico and selling them on the cheap in Tombstone. This put them in direct opposition to the town's legitimate merchants and the civilizing influence of the Earps. And their most important ally was the Cochise County Sheriff, a Democrat named Johnny Behan, who was politically and personally on the side of the rural ranchers and openly disliked the Earps. So you see, the gunfight was really a proxy war for the future of the West. It pitted northern, urban, Republican values against southern, rural, Democratic ones. When the Earps tried to enforce a town rule against carrying firearms, the Cowboys saw it as the city folk trying to crush their way of life. This complex political backdrop is the single most important part of the story that Hollywood almost always ignores. Part 3. The Slow Burn to Violence. The shootout on October 26, 1881, was not a random event. It was the violent and predictable end to a year of confrontations and political games that poisoned the relationship between the two sides. The first major run-in happened in July 1880. Virgil Earp, acting as a deputy U.S. Marshal, tracked stolen Army mules to the McClory Ranch. The Army then publicly named Frank McClory in a handbill for hiding stolen federal property. This public shaming was a serious insult, and Frank threatened Virgil, warning him, "If you ever again follow us as close as you did, then you will have to fight." The lines were drawn. The tension exploded after a stagecoach robbery in March 1881. During the attempted holdup of a stage carrying $26,000 in silver, the driver and a passenger were killed. This created immense pressure to catch the culprits, and it set the stage for a fatal mistake by Wyatt Earp. Wyatt wanted to be the next Cochise County sheriff, running against the cowboy-friendly Johnny Bean. Seeing an opportunity, Wyatt approached Ike Clanton, a known associate of the rustlers. He made Ike a secret deal. If Ike provided the information to capture the stagecoach robbers, Wyatt would make sure Ike got the big reward money. The prestige from the capture would then help Wyatt win the election. But before the deal could be finished, the robbers were killed in an unrelated fight. The deal was off, but it became a ticking time bomb. Ike Clanton became paranoid that Wyatt or Doc Holliday would reveal that he had been willing to betray his own people. In the world of the Cowboys, being known as an informant was a death sentence. This fear, combined with more arrests of their friends, pushed the Cowboys to the breaking point. They felt they were being targeted, and Frank McClory again threatened to kill the Earps if they didn't back off. Wyatt Earp wasn't just a pure symbol of justice. He was a savvy political operator whose personal ambition was a direct cause of the final conflict. His secret deal with Ike Clanton was a political move that backfired, and it was Ike's paranoia about being exposed that directly fueled his drunken threats on the day of the gunfight. Part 4. 30 Seconds on Fremont Street. The final trigger for the gunfight was a 24-hour marathon of drinking and public threats by a paranoid and aggressive Ike Clanton. On the night of October 25th, after a long poker game, a drunken Ike confronted Doc Holliday, and the Earps had to break it up. The next morning, Ike was still drinking heavily and started carrying a gun, which was against city rules. He roamed the streets telling anyone who would listen that as soon as he saw an Earp or Holliday, the ball would open, which was 19th century slang for a fight starting. The Earps had had enough. Around 1 in the afternoon, City Marshal Virgil Earp and his brother Morgan confronted Ike. Virgil walked up behind him and pistol whipped him, disarmed him, and dragged him to court. A little later, Wyatt Earp ran into Tom McClory. Believing Tom was armed, Wyatt struck him with his pistol as well. These public beatings were a critical escalation. In the honor-bound culture of the West, to be publicly struck and disarmed was a deep insult that demanded a violent response. When the Cowboys gathered later that afternoon, armed and defiant, it was a direct challenge to the Earps' authority, a challenge brought on by the Earps' own aggressive actions. At around 3 in the afternoon, the Earp party, Virgil, Morgan, Wyatt, and Doc Holliday, marched down Fremont Street to disarm the Cowboys. What happened next wasn't a classic duel. It was a close-quarters, chaotic melee in a narrow lot that was over in about 30 seconds. And first, the biggest lie of all, the fight did not happen at the OK Corral. That name was made famous by a movie decades later. The actual shootout took place in a 15-foot wide vacant lot on Fremont Street, 6 doors down from the corral's back entrance. As the lawmen approached, Virgil commanded, "Boys, throw up your hands. I have come to disarm you." From that point on, the historical record becomes a storm of conflicting testimony. The first major question, who was armed? There's no dispute that Frank McClory and 19-year-old Billy Clanton had pistols. It's also undisputed that Ike Clanton, the man who started it all, and another cowboy named Billy Claiborne were unarmed and ran away as soon as the shooting started. The big controversy was Tom McClory. The Cowboys and Sheriff Bean swore he was unarmed. The Earps claimed he was hiding a pistol or reaching for a rifle on his horse. The second ultimate question, who fired first? Witnesses for the Cowboys, including Sheriff Bean, said the Earps advanced on men who were trying to surrender and fired without warning. Witnesses for the Earps claimed the Cowboys went for their guns. Most accounts suggest 2 shots were fired at almost the same time, likely from Billy Clanton and either Wyatt Earp or Doc Holliday. What is certain is that in the next 30 seconds, nearly 30 shots were fired at point-blank range. It was a confusing, desperate, and brutal exchange, not a choreographed duel. The real gunfight was defined by its messy, chaotic, and legally ambiguous nature. Part 5. The Aftermath. No Heroes Parade. When the smoke cleared, 3 men were dead or dying: Frank McClory, Tom McClory, and Billy Clanton. 3 others were wounded. Virgil Earp was shot in the leg, Morgan Earp was shot through the shoulders, and Doc Holliday was grazed on the hip. Wyatt Earp was the only one on his side to walk away without a scratch. The aftermath was not a parade for heroes. 2 days after the gunfight, Ike Clanton filed murder charges against the Earps and Doc Holliday. They were arrested and jailed, and what followed was a 30-day preliminary hearing, the longest in Arizona's history, that tore the town apart. Dozens of witnesses gave completely contradictory accounts. The testimony from County Sheriff Johnny Bean was particularly damaging, as he claimed the Cowboys were trying to surrender. In the end, Judge Wells Spicer exonerated the lawmen, ruling they were fully justified in committing these homicides. However, he sharply criticized Virgil's judgment in deputizing his own brother and the famously hot-tempered Doc Holliday, suggesting their involvement was why the situation turned deadly. The fact that the Earps were arrested for murder and forced through a month-long hearing shows that a large part of the community, including the county's top lawman, saw them as aggressors. The funeral for the dead Cowboys was one of the largest in Tombstone's history, with hundreds marching in support. This directly contradicts the movie myth of lawmen being celebrated for cleaning up the town. Part 6. The Vendetta, when lawmen become outlaws. The judge's verdict didn't bring peace. It was just the prelude to an even bloodier chapter. The Cowboys, feeling cheated by the courts, sought their own form of justice. Their retaliation was swift and brutal. 2 months after the gunfight, assassins ambushed Virgil Earp at night, firing shotguns that shattered his left arm and left him permanently crippled. Then, on March 18, 1882, they struck again. While Morgan Earp was playing billiards, a shot was fired from a dark alley through a back door, hitting him in the spine. He died within the hour. With one brother maimed and another murdered, Wyatt Earp decided he could no longer rely on the law. Acting with a commission as a deputy U.S. Marshal, he formed a federal posse and began the infamous Earp Vendetta ride. While escorting his family to a train, Wyatt's posse found Frank Stillwell, a suspect in Morgan's murder. They chased him down the tracks and killed him. A few days later, they tracked down and killed another suspect, Florentino Indian Charlie Cruz. Then, at a place called Iron Springs, Wyatt's posse ran into a group of cowboys. In the gunfight that followed, Wyatt Earp himself shot and killed the notorious outlaw Curly Bill Brocious with a shotgun blast. By this point, the supposed champion of law and order was himself a fugitive. Warrants had been issued for the arrest of Wyatt and his men for the murder of Frank Stillwell. Their old rival, Sheriff Johnny Bean, was now legally hunting them. In April 1882, the Earp party fled Arizona, ending their bloody crusade. Wyatt Earp, the man who claimed to represent law and order, ended his time in Tombstone by operating completely outside the system, settling his scores with a gun. So why does the Hollywood myth endure? It persists because it replaces all this messy, morally gray complexity with a simple, satisfying story of good versus evil. The legend was first born in the mind of an aging Wyatt Earp himself, who worked with a writer on a heavily fictionalized and self-serving biography that scrubbed away the ugly details and recast him as a selfless hero. Hollywood simply bought the rights to that legend. The commercial failure of the more historically accurate 1994 film Wyatt Earp, compared to the huge success of the stylish and fictionalized Tombstone, released just months earlier, proves it. When given the choice between the complex truth and the entertaining lie, audiences overwhelmingly chose the lie. The final irony is that the gunfight's fame is almost entirely a product of the myth. In 1881, it was just a brief, bloody street fight noted in the local paper under the headline, "Death's Doings." It was largely forgotten until Hollywood decided to print the legend. So the next time you watch a classic Western, remember the messy, complicated, and far more interesting truth hiding behind the myth. But what do you think? After hearing the real story, do you see the Earps as heroes, lawmen doing a tough job, or something else entirely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and thanks for watching.